a great pleasure to see Tim again and to welcome Tim Foxon, Professor of Sustainability Transitions at the University of Sussex, which is in Brighton, where incidentally, Gabby and I will be next June. We're going to have an anti-austerity economics day in the Jubilee Library in Brighton on June the 20th, if anybody happens to be around. But today's talk that Tim is going to do for us is called A Green New Deal and the Wellbeing Economy, and looks at how climate action, economic justice, and well-being can be brought together in a genuinely transformative way. Now, we had the chance to hear Tim give a very similar talk live at the Modern Money Lab UK conference in Bristol last year, and we liked it so much that we asked him to come back and share it again as part of our January programme. So thank you very much to Tim for agreeing to do that. And having said that, it's over to Tim.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Stephen, for that kind introduction. And thank you, Gabby, for all the work in organising the talk. And I've very much enjoyed the previous two lectures in the series. And hopefully, I think this talk builds quite well on that. So I will then share my screen. Great. Can you see the slides?
Yes. Do you want to just check it moves to the next one before we begin?
There we go.
Yep, perfect.
Great. Okay, so there we go. Yeah, so thank you very much for the invitation. So I'm going to talk about a Green New Deal and the wellbeing economy. So maybe just to introduce myself first. As Stephen said, I'm Professor of Sustainability Transitions at the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex in the UK. So I've mainly worked over the last 30 years on energy and sustainability policy issues, a number of UK universities, and particularly from physicist by background, but within the ecological economics tradition. So I've been a board member and now treasurer of the European Society for Ecological Economics. And I should also, happy to acknowledge that this talk draws on work with colleagues under the CRED Centre, which was Centre for Research on Energy Demand Solutions, and current research, my colleague Josh Lates, who's here, as part of the Energy Demand Research Centre in the UK. And there's references to a couple of our papers there, and also the local Green New Deals report with Donald Brown and colleagues, which we'll refer to. So today I'm going to talk about the need to address the ecological and climate change challenge, and what an M&T perspective can bring to this, and how we can bring these together and using these ideas of Green New Deal and wellbeing economy. So the starting point is that there's a need for high levels of both public and private investment to address the challenge of climate change towards the globally agreed goals, see, apart from the US now, but agreed by other countries to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. But the political economy of the public investment in the UK and in other countries is constrained by perceptions of what the government can afford to spend. And that's obviously where an M&T perspective can tell us that net zero carbon investment, finding the money is not the problem for those of you who've seen the film. This sets it out very well, and obviously previous talks in this series. But that doesn't mean that governments can have unlimited spending power. There are clearly monetary constraints on, so it's the constraints in terms of the real economy, not on the size of the budget deficit, and particularly in terms of concerns that too much public spending would drive inflation. But from an ecological economics perspective, there are also natural resource and ecological constraints that need to be taken into account. So I will talk a little bit then about the two sort of main economic perspectives on this, a green growth perspective, which is a sort of more mainstream perspective, and then a post-growth perspective, which has been rapidly developing over the last 10 to 20 years. And then talk about the idea of a Green New Deal and sort of different versions of that, but all trying to combine a sort of program for government to combine climate, economic, and social goals. And then finally, a sort of a well-being economy approach that the goal of economic activity should be around improving human well-being within planetary boundaries. So, I mean, I'll talk a lot about the UK as I'm most familiar with the UK, but I think hopefully some of these lessons also resonate with other countries, particularly obviously the countries have their own sovereign currency. So for the UK to be on track to be net zero by 2050, the Climate Change Committee, which is the advisory committee, estimates that additional capital investment of around £50 billion per year is needed by 2030. So in the 2024 manifesto, the UK Labour Party, they originally pledged the Green Prosperity Plan of £28 billion per year, but this was reduced to around £15 billion per year in the manifesto, and they've obviously subsequently they won that election, but they cited the public debt concerns, and particularly the Liz Truss mini budget, which Scott Fulwise had talked about in his lecture, has been a very big impact on the public debate in the UK. And obviously from an M&T perspective, negative terms of these perceptions of what governments can afford to spend. I mean, I should still acknowledge that the now Labour government has ambitious plans around clean power by 2030, a new public energy company, British Energy, plans for new nuclear and carbon capture storage plants, a warm homes plan, which we're still waiting for the details of, and a national wealth fund for industrial transformation. So it's not that they're not doing anything on the climate change issue, but there's potential to do more and to be more transformative of the economy. But the environmental and social spending is constrained by the UK government's fiscal rules, introduced by Chancellor Rachel Reeves. And these are that the day-to-day public spending should be met by tax revenues by 2029 to 30, and that net government debt, as it's understood, should be falling as a proportion of GDP by 2029 to 30. And obviously, from an M&T perspective, we would see that these are arbitrary rules and do not. So, as we said, the focus should be on the impact of government spending on the real economy, not on the size of the public deficit. So, an M&T perspective argues that governments should have their own sovereign currency, have no financial limit on any spending which is authorised by their national legislature. And this was shown in great detail for the UK in a paper by Berkeley et al., so colleagues from the Gower Institute in the UK, and also Josh Ryan Collins from UCL in a paper on the self-financing state that laid out in great detail this institutional analysis of how spending and taxation works in the UK economy. And basically any spending authorised by Parliament is charged to the Consolidated Fund, which is basically a line of credit based on the government's tax-raising power under the 1866 Exchequer Act. And all tax revenues are paid into this Consolidated Fund and thereby removed from the economy. But there's no direct relation between the tax revenues and spending in any one year. And then government bond issues provide a risk-free investment for investors, and they're not the point of government bond issues is not to finance government spending. So, but as I said, there are still monetary constraints that government spending needs to avoid fueling inflation, but that depends on the macroeconomic conditions at the time as to whether government spending would like to fuel inflation or not. And there's been a widespread critique of the current mainstream approach, which is based on central banks raising interest rates to constrain demand, where Isabella Weber and others have argued and provided evidence that the current inflation that we've seen over the last few years has been largely a result of supply side shocks. So first sort of bottlenecks associated with the COVID emergency, and then increasing international energy prices as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then firms taking this opportunity to increase their prices to protect profits. So that then the supply side driven inflation should be targeted through other measures than increasing interest rates because of the negative impacts that the increasing interest rates has. So inflation pressures are best addressed through targeted price and regulatory measures. And obviously you can't be adjusting tax in real time, but you can have automatic stabilizers in the taxation system that tax rises or tax rates rise if inflation starts to become excessive over a period of time. But as I say, from an ecological economics perspective, there are also natural resource constraints on public investment. So the real ecological or biophysical constraints on the total level of production, consumption, and economy in relation to natural resource inputs, so energy and material inputs, and the impacts on natural systems, including impacts of climate change, but also biodiversity loss and other impacts on ecological systems. And work by my former colleague Diana Neal at Leeds, now Barcelona, and colleagues showed that rich countries are already using much more than their fair share of natural resources and these other planetary boundaries that I'll refer to in a moment. So that implies that then there's a need to increase public spending on areas that are socially and ecologically useful, and that's where the Green New Deal comes in. But also at the same time, we want to reduce those activities that are not socially and ecologically useful, and reduce public spending and support for those areas, such as subsidies for fossil fuel production and tax breaks for wealthy individuals. And this was set out in a paper, which again I'll come back to, by Christopher Olk, Colleen Schneider, who I know has been one of the lecturers on your course, and Jason Hickel. And I'll come back to some of the details of what they propose. So these perspectives argue that we need to combine these insights from MNT on public spending and ecological economics on these natural resource and biophysical constraints. So one way of understanding these constraints is through the donut economy model, which was developed by economist Kate Rayworth from Oxford, now running the Donut Economy Action Lab. So these 12 planetary boundaries, including climate change, but also acidification, biodiversity loss, there's nutrient pollution, nutrient flows, that globally we are, as human impacts on the environment, exceeding and greatly exceeding at least 7 of those planetary boundaries in terms of those safe thresholds of human activity on these biophysical systems. But at the same time, as we know, we're sadly not meeting everyone's social needs in the world. So this donut economy model is that we need to transform our economies so that economic activities within this safe and just space between the ecological ceiling and the social foundation. And as I say, so the social foundation includes the basic needs around access to clean energy, water, food, health, but also social and political factors like equality, social cohesion, political voice, peace and justice. And of course, there's maybe more difficult to measure, but those are based on the, again, agreed goals under the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So that gives a sort of view of how we're doing it at a global scale. And Kate Raworth has then developed ideas which are very closely linked to the wellbeing economy ideas I'm going to talk about on how to think like a 21st century economist. And the other aspect of this that the donut economy model, I think, illustrates very well is the inequality between countries. And this comes from work by Diane Neal and colleagues. There's a website you can do this for you look at the data for your own country. So rich countries like the UK are vastly exceeding our fair share of these planetary boundaries, whilst on the whole, but on average, but obviously not completely, meeting the social needs of its citizens, whereas poorer countries are generally within their fair share of the ecological ceiling, but not meeting all the social and political needs of their citizens. And sadly, there's no country in the world which finds this happy medium of the social and just space of being within their fair share of the planetary boundaries, but meeting all social needs. So that implies obviously different strategies that rich countries have to transform their economy to reduce their environmental, their energy and material throughput, to reduce their environmental impact, whereas obviously poorer countries do need to grow to ensure that they meet their social needs of their citizens, but in a way which is within these planetary boundaries and the ecological ceiling. So this brings us to the question of what's the economy for? And so you would argue from a wellbeing economy perspective that it's for the aim of the economy should be about delivering shared well-being for all within these planetary boundaries. And as I said, sort of that's illustrated by the donut economy model, that this is about meeting everyone's needs. So those basic needs around food, shelter, good health, clean water, sufficient energy, but also the social needs of access to education, participation, social justice, fairness, human rights. They're equally important. But to do that in a way which maintains and protects ecological systems we depend on, the safe climate, protected biodiversity ecosystems, nitrogen flows, fresh water, and so on. And so as I said, the sort of wellbeing economy approach is that we try to directly transform the economy so that in a direction that meets people's needs and improves their well-being generally, but within these planetary boundaries. And that should be the sort of aim of government activity and government spending. So that takes us to this sort of contrast between the current approach, which is based on a green growth approach, and a well-being or economy or post-growth approach. So green growth approach is obviously oriented around the goal of increasing GDP growth. And one of the ways of doing this is to be investment in industrial development, such as green industrial clusters, leading to job creation and economic growth. Now, again, we're not arguing against investment in the things that we need, like renewable energy, but that's seen as driving economic growth. Public investment is then seen in a fairly limited way, usually, as de-risking private investment. So that the majority of investment should come from the private sector, and public investment is is seen in this de-risking role, and economist Daniel Gabor has written a lot about this. So then you get to this sort of trickle-down model of the impacts of economic growth, that it enables higher levels of consumption, which is usually thought of as the way of improving well-being. And then it also, economic growth then provides the tax revenues to government, which can then be recycled to higher public spending on health, education, and welfare, etc. But the contrast is the post-growth approach, where the goal would be improving human well-being within planetary boundaries, investment in key industries such as renewables, as I said, but actually aiming to contract harmful industries. And of course, have to have a public debate of what is harmful, but certainly from an ecological perspective, we should be rapidly contracting use of fossil fuels, be constraining flying, because that's particularly environmentally damaging, and industries like the finance sector, where we and many others argue that a lot of the activity within the finance sector is just about making more money and is not supporting the productive economy. And then the aim would be to directly address well-being, such as providing access to universal public services for energy and water. So everybody has the right to a sufficient amount of clean energy, water, food to meet their basic needs. And so the crucial difference is that this involves not just efficiency improvements, they're obviously important, but sufficiency measures to reduce these intensive forms of consumption where they're net socially harmful. And obviously, as part of this, and part of the universal basic services would be about increasing government spending, and as we said then, using other measures such as price controls to contain inflation. As I say, I'm happy to come back to these in the question. I'm not following the chat in real time, so as it's distracting. So, but happy to respond to your questions at the end. So in this work with Donald Brown and colleagues, we looked at the idea of a Green New Deal and the sort of different perspectives on that. So the idea actually emerged again. So in the UK, in response to the 2007-2008 financial crisis, and the original Green New Deal group from the UK included Caroline Lucas, who many of you will know, former leader of the Green Party and Green MP, and Richard Murphy, who, again, some of you will know, has written a lot about tax justice from an MT perspective. So the original Green New Deal was more a Keynesian perspective to the financial crisis, around public investment from that perspective. And it drew on lessons from the 1930s New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt in the US. Again, this got some interest in the UK, but was never taken up by a mainstream political party. These ideas sort of filtered around, and then they were developed by the Sunrise Movement in the US, and as a basis for the non-binding resolution to Congress proposed by Representative Ocasio-Cortez in 2021, which I'll come back to in a moment. And that obviously got a lot of interest in the US through that resolution. So the resolution, again, it explicitly aims to link social, ecological, and economic goals. And I think that's the key thing about Green New Deal. And the 5 main goals of the Green New Deal, as presented by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and colleagues, to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, to create millions of high-wage jobs, ensure prosperity and security, to invest in infrastructure industry to meet the needs of the 21st century, to ensure clean air and water, healthy food, access to nature, and a sustainable environment for all. So there's ecological goals and the social goals around creating just and equitable social and economic systems that care for frontline and vulnerable communities. So that linking of these social, economic, and environmental goals. So we also reviewed these sort of different versions of the Green New Deal. So some are more from a green growth perspective, and some are more from a post-growth perspective. But the sort of core features that we identified are sort of 5 core features around the need for reforms of the financial system, the need for reforms around ownership structures, the need to promote economic, social, and climate justice, the need for green infrastructure investment, and issues around how these Green New Deal investment is financed, which links to an M&T perspective. So I'll go through some of these. Again, not all of these could be necessarily implemented, but I think this gives you a range of the potential ideas that people have argued are needed to combine meeting environmental, social, and ecological goals. So the first one was this reduction of the power of the financial system through regulation of financial markets, and this was from the original Green New Deal group in 2008. Capital controls to mitigate capital flight following this Green New Deal investment policies, tighter controls on sustainable private lending, on generation of credit, the forced demerger of these too big to fail banking and financial groups, splitting retail banking, which provides a useful service to the economy, from this corporate finance and securities dealing, and regulating these derivative products and other exotic financial instruments that gave rise to the 2008 financial crisis. The second one is about reform of ownership structures. So again, the group affiliated to the Labour Party in the UK, but again wasn't adopted as formal policy by the Labour Party around public ownership of key monopolies such as energy networks, water, social housing, transport, and telecoms, new public institutions such as National Green Investment Bank, National Food Service, National Nature Service, and crucially more community and local ownership of services, for example, through energy cooperatives, land trusts, and this idea of community wealth building, again, which our colleagues here are looking at, that more of economic activity should be retained within local communities, for example, by supporting anchor institutions and there's big local industries to support local SMEs and small businesses. So those ideas of ownership structures were a second strand of these Green New Deal policies. A third strand around economic, social, and climate justice. These investments should create net new green jobs. This requires an expanded power for organised labour, trade unions, whose power has been taken away under the neoliberal economic model, and increase equality, diversity, and justice, ensuring social justice and equality, gender equality, and crucially increase citizen participation in decision-making processes through things like citizen juries and more local involvement in those decision-making processes. And then the final one is about the financing the Green Deal, or from an M&T perspective, the measures that you need to put in to avoid the inflationary impacts of the Green New Deal. Different forms of fiscal policy, of green gilts, green investment bonds, municipal bonds, ecological reparations to the global south, and then other forms of taxation, carbon tax, land value tax, wealth tax, etc. But again, from an M&T perspective, they're not to provide the finance for government spending, to reduce, take spending, private spending, out of the economy on things that are not ecologically and socially beneficial, and obviously to reduce the high levels of inequality, which again create many social injustices. Monetary policy through low central bank interest rates and greening, quantitative easing through again more closer to what central banks have been doing, stimulating private investment through different forms of regulatory and incentives to encourage investment in renewables and phase out of fossil fuels. And those that you know well, Eva Nessian and Randy Ray wrote a paper on how to pay for the Green New Deal, building on the work of, drawing on the work of Keynes, how to pay for the war. And they recommended forms of investment, but also deferred consumption, so through voluntary or forced saving schemes or welfare support that kicks in later after the initial stimulus provided by the increased public investment. So what we wanted to do was, in this report, was to ask the question of what can be done at a local level to have this sort of plan to link climate, social, and economic goals more locally. Now, obviously, the financial things are more addressed at the national level. So we focused more on the ecological and social measures around cheaper, warmer, zero carbon homes, promoting affordable, sustainable public transport, putting car-free centres and active travel, and expanding green spaces and nature restoration. And again, there's a link to the report. I will circulate the slides afterwards. I will go through all the details, but just on the cheaper, warmer, zero carbon homes, again, public investment through investment in energy efficiency and electrification of heating through support for heat pumps. And we looked at two regions of the UK, the north of Tyne around Newcastle and Northumbria, and the Greater Brighton area around where we are in Brighton and the surrounding local authorities. And we looked at the potential for this and the benefits that it would give. So investing in cheaper, warmer homes would help to lift households out of fuel poverty, create new jobs, and save households money on their energy bills, because you've improved energy efficiency, so reduce the amount of energy that people need to provide a good service in terms of affordable warmth. And we argue this could be done through a mixture of public and private investment, with the public investment more concentrated on the lower income deciles. So north of Tyne is a relatively poor area, Greater Brighton relatively more affluent, but again, obviously with parts that are less affluent. So that public investment would be concentrated on those lower income deciles, and measures to stimulate this private investment by households where it's more affordable, but through supporting credit, for example. As I say, I won't go through all the measures, but the context for this was that work done by John Barrett and colleagues in Leeds as part of the Grid Centre and colleagues across the UK and other universities, that argued that UK could get to its net zero emissions target by 2050 with a 50% reduction in energy demand or energy use, whilst maintaining or enhancing citizens' quality of life. And crucially, many of these measures that I'm going to talk about that we looked at in the report do deliver these wider benefits. So health improvement, good jobs, social equity, clean and safe local environment. And so then the other thing we did in this work in Northern Tyne and Wellbeing was we set up a focus group in each location with randomly selected citizens and asked how they valued these co-benefits. So we looked at these 6 of these policy options that we looked at in the report around home energy efficiency, affordable public transport, active travel, promoting walking and cycling, car-free zones, city centres, nature-based solutions, plant-based diets, and we asked them to score these against 6 wellbeing criteria. So health benefits, safe supported community, value for money, quality jobs, safe and clean local environment, and climate change. And cutting to the chase, that these focus groups found that people supported on a net basis these measures in relation to delivering those wellbeing goals. And in Greater Brighton, particularly affordable public transport and promoting nature-based solutions were seen as very favourable. In the Northern Tyne region, all of the measures, apart from promoting and supporting plant-based diets, where there was more equivocal the support. So more work is maybe needs to be done to promote the benefits of that. But the crucial thing, we also asked people to discuss these measures and what they thought about governments introducing these types of measures. And crucially, they said that they were supportive as long as it was done in a fair way. So fairness in terms of distribution of benefits, ensuring segments of population not excluded to abilities or location. They wanted still affordability and value for money and reliability of the service delivery. But they recognised that particularly the health benefits, that these type of measures could enhance people's physical and mental wealth and social opportunities and environmental protection benefits to future generations, but also that these improving local environments, which again improves people's well-being. So I think that's sort of one snapshot, but many other work again with citizens, juries, citizens panels have sort of had this similar message that citizens in general support these measures to reduce these high impact forms of consumption, providing it's done in a fair way. So I think 2 more slides, then we'll come to Q&A. So as I said, then the paper by Chris Falk, Colleen Scheider and Jason Hickel, perfect called How to Pay for Saving the World, Environmental Theory for Degrowth Transition. They argued that the MMT and post-growth or degrowth perspectives are complementary. So MMT shows that increased public spending on social and ecological goals doesn't require or imply GDP growth, because it can be, public spending can be afforded, but we need to consider these ecological constraints of spending and other resource constraints, and that ecological understanding needs to be a bit better integrated into these MMT perspectives. And they, in their paper, proposed 4 common monetary and fiscal policy areas, which are common or synergistic between MMT and ecological economic perspective. So one is shifting taxation away from labour to wealth and resources. Again, from an MMT perspective, taxation is about taking money out of the economy, but taxation also helps to deliver social goals in terms of improving equity and reducing inequality. Second area around credit regulation. So again, supporting through central banks and private banks to support credit for investments that help to deliver these social and ecological goals. The third area is around price controls to limit these supply side measures, such as the high energy prices that we saw in many countries after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where forms of price control were implemented in many countries. So it's not, again, not a completely unknown thing. Reduced working time. So as people's basic needs are met, then they can have the opportunity to reduce their working time, so to have more time to spend with family and friends, which again is well known to improve well-being. And this idea of universal public services to meet those basic service needs. And then the fourth area, the job guarantee. So the government should provide a backstop of providing jobs that could help to live these social and ecological goals. And again, that's one of the core policy recommendations from an MNT perspective. And just to end on a positive note, that we often feel we're struggling to get these ideas into the more mainstream debates, but just last year, and now there was a report to the UN by the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Olivier de Schutter, and he looked at this from a post-growth perspective, how poverty could be eradicated, but going beyond a growth perspective to a more post-growth well-being economy perspective, as I've been talking about today. That report recognises one of the challenges is financing state services and global interdependencies, but it also recognises the potential of an MMT perspective. It quotes Stephanie Kelton's work, Deficit Myth, and the paper by Christopher Olk and colleagues just mentioned, that public spending should be strictly targeted on socially and ecologically sustainable production, and it should go hand in hand with a overall reduction in demand for unnecessary goods and services, especially those whose production is the most resource and energy intensive. That's a very nice, I think, summary of the argument. And this, they're now building on this report, under this called NEEP, New Economics for Eradicating Poverty, and they're developing a roadmap of policies and hopefully drawing on the type of policies that I've been talking about in terms of economic systems transformation, labour policies and promoting the care economy, promoting access to social protection and services, obviously action to address the climate, environmental resources challenges, and action on trade, finance, and debt and global solidarity. Again, I've talked mostly from the UK or industrial country perspective, but very much looking forward to the talk from our colleagues as to how this can be taken forward also on a global basis, and for example, reducing the burden of debt in foreign currencies that many developing countries face. So I think I will leave it there. And as I say, I think there are this one action that's going on at the national level, at the global level, in addition to the work that many people on the call here are doing at a national and local level to look at how we can bring MMT and ecological economics ideas together to promote a more social, socially just world within the planetary boundaries that we face. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great note to end on. Thank you so much, Tim. What a brilliant talk, and thank you for the really excellent slides as well. There's been a little bit of discussion in the chat. I think Stephen kind of summed it up with a comment slash question that he put in about halfway down the chat. So perhaps I'll start off with that. Most people, when you explain these ideas to them, support a post-growth perspective subject to them feeling secure in their basic needs. Yet we've had little impact on politics. What do you see are the hopeful signs that this might change in time?
I mean, I think we're clearly at you know, very important point in history. I mean, obviously everybody sort of always thinks that, but I think obviously we've seen with President Trump's election again in the US and the rise of far-right parties in many European countries and including UK, where the far-right Reform Party is currently leading the polls. But we've seen that the Green Party in the UK and new leader Zach Polanski, who came to the MMT conference and has been very sympathetic to these ideas, is also going up in the polls. So I think there's maybe slightly oversimplifying, but people, many people do feel insecure and want more economic but also social security in terms of ensuring their basic needs are met. And I think that to me, these ideas around Green New Deal and wellbeing economy are much more hopeful and positive message rather than the messages that we get from the right wing. And it's obviously about then helping people to understand these issues, but obviously packaging them in a way which is attractive to the public. But again, we've seen that, for example, in the election of Sultan Hamdani as the new mayor of New York, promoting again these similar types of policies. So I think there are some hopeful signs as well as the big challenging signs that we see.
Yeah, there's so much misinformation out there, isn't there? I want to come to a comment by Mark Diesendorf, which I think we struggle with in Australia too. Governments by most major political parties are influenced, even controlled, by vested interests. To push government to implement the important strategies discussed here, we the people must build a social movement to expose and challenge the methods used by vested interests and gain and maintain political power. And I think absolutely, and I think Mark is talking about what we've come to know here as state capture. Do you use that term in the UK?
Yes.
Yeah. Is it a George Monbiot term or
yes.
somebody else
yes.
maybe? Yeah. Yeah.
It's quite a widely used term.
Yeah. Well, I first heard it with an Australian politician, so I wasn't sure about that. But I do think that's a good kind of catch-all for the vested interests having basically the control over a large part of the way politics is run. And
Yes.
It's good to see, like you said, that there are green shoots, literally, metaphorically.
Yes, and I think Mark's obviously right that I think we need the two things. We need the to make the sort of intellectual arguments for these type of measures and that they do make sense. But also obviously we know from history that change is usually mostly driven by social movements and. So it's obviously great what we're doing with the Money Lab in Australia with the course and the Money Lab UK activities. That and say that it's to me very encouraging that the Green Party and the new leader Zach Polanski is sympathetic to these ideas. So I say, I mean that it you feel it should be a message that should be attractive in terms of, this is about ensuring we meet everyone's needs, and we actively try and improve the quality of people's lives, and that should be a political message that can be so, but we need obviously the politicians, but we need these demonstrations on the ground. And again, for example, the Don't Economy Action Lab through Kate Rayworth that I mentioned, they're working with many local communities. Kate Rayworth, the Don't Economics Action Lab, to actually put these ideas in practice in many communities. So again, there's a lot of work on the ground, I think, in cities such as Amsterdam, for example, but many other cities and local communities to show what a difference these ideas can make in practice. So that's obviously very important.
There's a good question here from Adrian. I don't know if you're with us, Adrian, if you'd like to come off mute and ask it yourself, but I'm happy to. Oh, here you are. Excellent.
I can. Thanks, Gabby. And thank you, Tim. I'm actually a colleague of Tim's, but I'm a bit ill at the moment, so I'm watching him from home rather than in the
Welcome.
department.
It's great to have you.
And it's lovely to see you all and be part of this webinar. So, Tim, mine was about the scope for autonomous action at the national state level, presuming there's some social movement and progressive government in charge, versus needs for more concerted structural change and reforms internationally. And actually, you answered the second bit in this about where the agency for those sorts of changes comes from. But then I wondered also what we might learn from history as well. And as you know, I've gone back and looked at new international economic order stuff in the 70s around limits to growth and things. So is there anything valuable, you think, from history that we can draw on?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. I mean, I think there's obviously more work to be done in terms of sort of fleshing out some of the details of the things I've been talking about. But obviously, there's lots of ideas around them, and I think obviously better understanding of what it would mean if you do this in one country and not in other countries. So there may have to be restrictions on capital flows in and out of the country, but the key point stands that the UK government issues the currency, the sovereign currency, and therefore anything that we can do with the human and ecological resources available, we can afford. And I think, as I said, I mean, this actually goes back to Keynes in his pamphlet "How to Pay for the War," which made this very clear, that and obviously what we saw in the wartime. And again, it's not a perfect analogy for many reasons, but there was a big expansion of public investment, and these measures such as deferred consumption and voluntary enforced savings schemes to take some of that spending out of the economy meant that big increase in public spending didn't lead to runaway inflation. So that's one of the lessons that we can look to from history, but obviously try to have a public spending for more positive reasons.
There's a bit of a discussion earlier on in the chat about different types of indicators, single indicators, dashboard indicators, indicators that take into account things like housing. I know you've you've probably looked at this in great detail. Do you have a view on which particular indicators we should be focusing on, or are different ones better for different tasks?
Yeah, thanks. And again, I should say, I work with colleague Josh Late here. We've just had a paper come out in Energy Research and Social Science, which is about how these approaches to assessing these multiple benefits. And so we we weren't trying to say about what the exact set of indicators should be, but the idea that local authorities should assess their spending in relation to these ecological and social indicators. And one example is that Cornwall Council in the UK are using a version of the donut wheel, which I presented, to assess potential policy measures against a set of ecological and social indicators, and they use this sort of green to red assessment in terms of the good or bad impacts of a policy measure on those different areas, and then they can use that also in a learning way that if a policy measure looks like it's going to have a negative impact on biodiversity, for example, then you can think about what other measures, complementary measures, can be brought in to reduce that negative impact of that measure. So it gives a way of actually sort of implementing some of these ideas at a local level through using these ranges of environmental and social indicators. Thank you.
There was a couple of questions from Dylan about bond market and monetary sovereignty, which Stephen has actually suggested it would be worth going back to Scott Fulweiler's talk, which steps through it in very thorough way and accessible way. So yes, I think that's probably a good idea. Would anybody else like to ask a question live?
So I have one other question regarding kind of private money creation that I'd like to ask. So thank you very much, Tim. Great talk. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring aware that, like, obviously the government has this ability to deficit spend. Currently they don't. But also the majority of money is created by private banks through the kind of money creation process of giving out loans. So my question is, could we also, alongside a kind of Green New Deal implemented by the government through its deficit spending abilities, could we introduce some kind of like window guidance policy around kind of directing loans from private banks in the economy?
Great, thanks for that question. Yes, and I think that is part of this sort of Green New Deal ideas, that this sort of credit guidance to in terms of the lending of private banks, and again, I mean, we saw through the quantitative easing that a lot of that from central banks went to inflating asset prices. So thinking about how not just government spending, but also through different forms of credit guidance and lower interest rates, for example, for socially and ecologically beneficial investments, could also transform more the private investment as well. I've got our colleague in the room here, Professor Matthew Aguala, who wanted to ask a question.
I wasn't sure if that was okay.
Is that okay, Gabby?
Do I need to come up to the podium?
I think it's fine. Yeah, please.
I think you probably do. Yes. People can see you.
So thanks. My name is Matthew. I work with Tim in Sussex.
Great to see you.
Thanks. As ever, Tim, I seem to be viscerally predisposed to reject about 75% of your foundations, but then agree with about 90% of your conclusions. So I think we get there, but from different approaches in economics. So I think that's exciting about this kind of work. Globally, the average tax rate of GDP is about 15, 17%. In the OECD, it's about 34%. In a country like the UK, it's 37, 38. Some countries, France, Netherlands, up to 45 or so. Given that the policy lever in modern monetary theory is using that tax lever to constrain inflation.
Yeah.
What's the political economy model to ensure that governments are actually going to do that? Because without using that lever, we tend to sort of just inflation. I know that Tim Besley has done quite a bit of work on this capacity of the state, making political economy models of tax capacity, showing that poor countries don't tax, rich countries do tax.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there's a way that we can bring that in to this kind of analysis, because I think the well-being economy and I think the Green New Deal need it.
Great.
Stephen, would you like to be in this conversation?
I would just say that there's no MMT economist that would accept that the discretionary raising of taxation is the appropriate way of trying to manage inflation. So it's a very common misinterpretation of MMT, but it is a misinterpretation of MMT. Yes, the tax system is there in the first place to create monetary systems. It's where currencies came from in the first place, thousands of years ago. And an efficient tax system is necessary to ensure that there is a demand for the currency in the community. And of course, taxes delete currency units from the private sector and do make space within the productive capacity of the economy for them to be public spending without it being inflationary. But there are none of us that think that in the event that inflation rises or is expected to rise relative to some official target, that the first mechanism for reacting to that, or even anywhere near the first mechanism for reacting to that, generally speaking, would be adjustments in the tax system. That's what I wanted to say.
You're not wrong. That's not at all the case. I mean, this is not what Stephanie Kelton put in her book.
It is. I helped write that book.
Yeah. I mean, as I understand it, Stephen, I mean, it's, yeah, obviously, you know, governments can't respond in sort of real time by adjusting tax rates in the way that currently central banks reduce change interest rates, but you could, but the idea would be, as I understand it, that authorities like the Congressional Budget Office in the US, the Office of Responsibility in the UK, would do assessments of new policy measures in terms of their potential impact on the real economy, and including potential impacts on inflation, so that then that from the start, if certain level of public spending was thought to be at a risk of significantly driving inflation, then you could introduce complementary measures to prevent that, and particularly this idea of automatic stabilizers, if tax rates would sort of automatically respond if there are high levels of inflation. So you are to some extent using the tax system to alleviate those potential impacts of public spending, along with these ideas around deferred consumption.
And that work that you talked about, like looking at policies to determine their inflation impact, I've heard Stephanie Kelton say that should be the core business of economists. You know, that's what they're there to do.
Yeah, but from the point of view, you have to be clear about what the purpose of taxes are. For example, when we talk about, I'm very much in favor of taxing people with very high incomes and are very wealthy at a very high rate, and effectively having a maximum income. But that's not going to do very much at all to limit inflationary pressures in the economy, because rich people don't spend less, or don't spend much less when you tax them more highly. So they have a different that has a different purpose. If there is anybody who's very interested in a more detailed sort of MMT approach to demand management and price stability, I shared in the chat a link to a paper from 3 or 4 years ago that somebody called Nathan Tankers wrote. That's very well worth reading as far as that's concerned.
Yeah.
Nathan and Stephanie are much more expert in this than me, but I just thought I'd
and again, I mean, I'm not necessarily, but also, I mean, that governments can introduce price controls, and I think again, this is the work of Isabel Weber and others that inflation is driven, or in recent years, inflation has been driven largely by price increases in certain key sectors, particularly energy and food sectors, and you know, this sort of the measures to stimulate access for people to have basic needs met would would involve measures to control those price increases. So that would also be another way of addressing the inflationary impacts.
Yeah, if you think that inflation because of too much spending is an issue, then you need to free up resources. In Australia, there's plenty of industries in Australia that could be shrunk without any benefit, without any disbenefit to most of the population. And in the UK, I'm not saying you do this overnight, but in the UK, if you could severely shrink the City of London, you'd make lots of space for people that had been working in that industry to generally do something useful with their lives instead and provide other goods and services. That's the sort of, I know that's a radical idea and difficult to imagine that happening, but in the long run, that's basically the thinking.
Anybody else would like to come off mute and ask a question? Put your hand up or wave at me if you've got your camera on.
I mean, I think it's so I get Phil Lawns commenting. It's
yes, I
not
will
the
read
creation
that
of
one.
creating money that matters. That it's where it goes and what motivates and rewards the spending. So
yeah. Phil writes here, I don't have a problem with the creation of credit money. It gets shoveled into undesirable activities because we don't adequately and appropriately regulate private sector activities, nor do we confiscate economic rents. If we did this, adequate returns on bank-created credit money would be confined to investment in natural capital and productive forms of human-made capital. It's not the creation of credit money that matters, but where it goes and what motivates and rewards the spending of it. Remove the rewards and you remove the motivation. Yeah. Great. Well, I think, we are a little bit over time already. So perhaps if we don't have any more burning questions, we should wrap that up for tonight. But thank you so much, Tim. What an excellent talk. I'm sure people will be asked. In fact, one person has already asked for the slides. Would you mind if we shared them with the video?
Yeah, that's fine as a
Great.
sort of a
Okay.
PDF. So.
Fantastic. Yes, I can PDF them easy. Well, that's excellent. So thank you everybody for coming along again, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one. And thanks very much, Tim.
Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I can stop the
recording. Thank you to Gabby and Stephen, and look forward to the rest of the talks in the series. Bye for now.
Bye.